Folks, we have a lot of people in the room and we have people on Zoom, so we're going to be as careful as we can not to make extraneous noise because the Zoom people have trouble with noise interference. And if you do, Hope, of course, is speaking first, but later when we have questions and answers, if you speak loud and clearly, that would be very helpful. Steve, could you close that door? Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. We're so happy to see so many people here. It's really wonderful. Hope has very generously agreed to talk to us today about her experience with being a part of a church that believed in the Christian nationalists way of thinking and what helped her to come out of that and what drew her to this congregation. So I'm just going to turn it over to Hope Decker and look forward to hearing this.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for being here. I feel the generosity of spirit here, and the fact that you are all crowding into this small space means a lot to me. And Debbie said that Andrew and I have been here for several years. It's been 1 year.
Is that right?
Wow. And I take that as a great compliment that you feel that I've been here for a while. So thank you. When Andrew and I came here, I felt like a refugee from religious abuse and high control.
There's none of that here.
No. And so when I came here and I just was welcomed, even though sometimes when I tell people I used to be a conservative Christian, I can see on their face they're scared. They're not sure where I'm coming from. And I felt such welcome here. I have an essential tremor. I notice that I'm shaking. My voice is probably shaking. If I tell you I feel a little better, and my tremor goes away a little bit, but so far no. But I'm just going to tell you my story. There is a lot I could say. I could talk about in-depth Christian nationalism. I could talk about religious abuse. I was not sexually abused, but I certainly experienced a lot of clergy abuse, abuse of power, lots of control. I could talk to you about the patriarchy, which affects women in these environments in profound ways. I'm going to focus though on my story because I'll just get too wrapped up in the other stuff if I spend too much time in that. But you are very welcome to ask any questions. And I think you're going to be able to connect some dots when I talk about what I believed and what was put on me. I think you can see how being in an authoritarian church makes you very receptive to authoritarian government. So things that I was told I had to believe in order to go to heaven or in order to belong to a group were will set up a person to believe lies, believe somebody who's really strong, who comes on a little crass, but is putting forth your agendas. So Christian nationalism is interwoven into my story, even though at the time that's not what we called it. Bill.
I don't know if you said this, but Hope is allowing us to record this, so you're being recorded.
Thank you. Yeah, that's important. So I was in a village for 40 years. I I joined when I was in college. When I was 16, I was an atheist. My parents were liberal. And I had a loving, solid childhood, but my parents were alcoholics. And so I was searching for a place where people were not going to drink. I didn't realize it at the time, but that was a nice promise of sober people. They weren't awful drunks, but they were drunk, and you probably know that alcoholism shapes the whole family. So I was the person who didn't drink and wanted some safety. So when I was 16, I went to a youth group, a picnic, and it was put on by a woman who was Catholic and went to a Catholic charismatic prayer meeting. And so all my friends started going to this youth group, and I went to this picnic, and people were having fun. And the leader talked to me about her beliefs, and I told her about my beliefs. And it was an intellectual discussion to me. But later on, I went home and I said, well, God, if you're real, then just show yourself to me. And I felt peace. I felt such an overwhelming sense of peace that I thought, oh, this is different. And I've never experienced this. God must be real. And having no religious background and being really young. I mean, at the time, I thought 16 was, I could make my own decisions. But I look back and I see that that girl was very naive and young. And I just went along with anything. So they said, you need to be baptized in the Holy Spirit. And I was like, okay, bring it on. I'll speak in tongues, sure. And shortly after, so I didn't really go to the Catholic Church, but I went to this prayer meeting for a while. And shortly after that, I started going to what would become a mega church. And it was multiracial. It was very into the gifts of the Spirit. So speaking in tongues, dancing in the Spirit, prophecy, being slain in the Spirit. Does anybody know what that is?
Oh, yeah.
So you get so overwhelmed, supposedly by the Spirit of God, you fall back. And I've done it. I've had some really incredible, peaceful, moving spiritual experiences in this environment. So the reason why I stayed was I had some really deep spiritual moving experiences, mystical, in this environment. Where that leads me now is a little cautious, because in those environments, when I would have a really deep spiritual moving experience, they then would, you'd be in a worship service, you'd be singing songs, and you'd get kind of taken away. They'd call it the presence of God. And then afterwards you would, they'd have the sermon, they'd have the offering. So as you probably know, a lot of those churches are really controlling of finances, and there's a lot of high pressure to give money. And after you've been almost hypnotized and having this wonderful, beautiful experience, then to be asked, give more money than you can afford. And then a sermon, do this, this, and this, because you're doing it all wrong. And every single week it was, you're doing it all wrong, and here's how to do it better. That's abusive. And so the church that we belonged to for 40 years evolved a lot over time. When we first started going, it was very cult-like. There's something called the BITE model of cult behavior, and there's lists under each category: behavior, I think I can't remember anything else. But Andrew and I went through it, and we were like, the church that we belonged to in the beginning was a cult for sure. You checked most of the boxes on it. So we expected to give 23% of our income. And I know. And if you didn't, you weren't really accepted, and you couldn't be in leadership. You were expected to go to all the meetings, and there were several a week. You were expected to dress a certain way and talk a certain way. And, you know, like the dress was never written down. Nobody said, this is how you dress, but you got a feeling for the rules. And again, I didn't know any better. And I was told a bunch of things. And so I stayed because this was a community. I was having these mystical experiences, and I was feeling welcomed and supported and loved by people. I was a new mom after I graduated from college. And so when I was 16, I went to this almost mega church on Long Island. But when I went to college, I met Andrew, and he had already been going to this church. And this is the church that we had evolved over time. I also wanted to go back and talk a little bit about what I mean when I talk about high control environments. Think fundamentalism, think control over behavior, how you think, how you act, what you believe. And it's pretty comprehensive. And if it's high control, it's abusive. And it was abusive. Even though there were also, like these relationships that I had with people as a new mom. There were older women who took me under their wing and, helped me with my children. There were also high control parenting techniques that were kind of forced on us. And Andrew and I kind of skirted around some of it, but we still did a lot of stuff that I think was harmful to our kids, and we have apologized. There was one family that had a sheepskin rug in church, and their children had to sit, even toddlers, even babies, had to sit on the rug during service, and they had to be in the service. There was no separate children's church at the time. And if they got, the way that they were trained to stay on that is even babies got spanked if they moved off of the thing. Well, I had wiggly kids, and I was not about to do that. I knew they wouldn't stay, and it didn't make sense to me. Andrew and I both have teaching degrees. And so, you take child development, that a toddler is not going to sit on a blanket for an hour. And the services actually went a long time. You'd go to Sunday school, then you'd go to church service, and if the spirit was moving, worship could go on and on and on, and then preaching would go on and on and on. And then you'd break, and then we'd go back to church at night. And often the break was getting together with people and having dinner together, which was nice, but also it was a lot. And if you keep people really busy and tired, they're going to be more open to coercive control. So I often say I was a seeker, I was a deep thinker, I was just open, I still am. And I probably, if the Christian cult didn't present itself to me, I would have joined a yoga cult or something. I would have joined something like that, because that's kind of my bent. And the task now is to enjoy and be open-hearted with community without while keeping my autonomy. And for most adults, they learn that really early, but I was in this group for 40 years where my autonomy, my opinions, my dissent, if I disagree with something, was squashed. And especially as a woman, I could not say, no, I don't like that, or I don't want to do that. No, I don't want to volunteer in kids ministry. I don't want to do that. The church evolved, and part of it was Andrew and I evolving too. The first time I said, I don't want to do children's ministry anymore, I got so much pushback, but I was burnt out. And I said, I have to. You have to listen to me. And because we had such a long history together, we all kind of said, okay, that is a little much. Hope doesn't have to do children's ministry anymore. But let's see.
I'm noticing you're talking about we as if they're allowed to help make the whole decision for you.
There's, and you may notice when you talk to me that there's vestiges of that high control. Barbara Fry was talking to me and some other people at the dinner that Ann Hurst had done. And I was talking to Andrew about leaving right after it was done or something. And Andrew loves events and people. So getting him to leave something is always like the struggle in our marriage. But I said, after asking him to leave right after it's done, I said, otherwise I'm going to have to sit in the back and cry. And Anne said, why? And I thought to myself, that's because as a woman in a high control religious environment, I still feel like I can't say no. And so the fact that, no, it was Barbara Fry, called that, she didn't call it out, but she highlighted it in a way that made me realize it's still there. And you guys might see things like that too. But it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't bad all the time. There was a sense of belonging. I had a feeling of destiny and purpose. I was told all the time, you have a destiny, you have a purpose. And I'm finding now that my job is to just accept that maybe I don't have a destiny like that, like some big purpose, but just to be a human being and be myself is my calling right now. Yeah. Also, certainty was pretty nice. It was, yeah, it's comforting. It's nice to have all the answers and not have to struggle. Yeah. So when I started coming out of that and realizing I don't have all the answers, uncertainty is incredibly uncomfortable. And so when you see people doggedly following Christian nationalism, Trumpism, it's comforting to know the answers. And even if it's wrong, or the reality is really scary. Could somebody get me some water? Thank you. Sure. You don't really have to think or deal with the gray areas. And it's scary. So if you look at the people on Facebook that are just so determined to be hateful and oblivious to the truth and the needs of other people, underneath that is a great fear. and a discomfort and an inability to be with uncertainty. And if that gives you a little bit of compassion for somebody who's being awful. Yeah, the camera is gonna show up right now. Thank you. Giving it to the other person with the tremor.
You got the whole room, you got the whole library trembling, none of us is safe. You're so great.
So the reason why I stayed was there was a lot of benefits to it. I was also told that if I disagreed, I was on the path to hell. I was going to, if you question, you're on the road to backsliding. If you question, you're going to incur God's wrath. If you question, you're not supposed to ever speak against or question the pastor or leaders. So what they say goes. Yeah. It's absurd.
You should wish.
No, I don't. That's scary.
Debbie, I can open the door with you.
Meg, do you want to come in?
Yeah.
Maybe she's. So questioning was equated with a lack of faith, rebellion. We all had to believe the exact same way.
No. Oh, no, they made space for him.
I have a question from we Zoomers.
Yes.
How do we, is this a question and answer period yet or not?
Not yet. Gotta hold it, Louise.
I did that.
When there's a lot of crosstalk, we can't hear.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Sure. Thanks, Louise.
Yeah, thank you.
So there was also pressure to conform, especially in the beginning when the church was very cult-like. It was the early 80s. So Laura Ashley prairie skirts were very popular, nice long. So we had the prairie tops and the prairie skirts and the French braid with their long hair. And if you're familiar with the polygamous cult, I didn't realize at the time, but we looked a little bit like the polygamous cult. I don't have any pictures from back then that I'm aware of, but it would be interesting. Parenting choices, language, all was monitored. We all monitored like as if we had to keep each other in line. And the interesting thing is, I have in this environment had really no autonomy, no decision making for myself. But and we all felt like that. We all kind of gave it up. We didn't have to think things through because we were certain we knew the truth and our leaders were telling us stuff. But we also thought we had the right to legislate what everybody else did. So take a large voting bloc that feels that way, and how are they going to influence the politics? They're going to feel like they have a right to everybody else's business, but also not really take a reflective look at their own lives and tend to themselves. We were incredibly arrogant because we felt like we had an in with God. Charismatics feel like they're the next revelation, like there's a Protestant Reformation and then the Baptists with immersion, baptism. And then, of course, the charismatics was speaking in tongues, and we are the pinnacle of God's truth in the world. And everybody else is either not really a Christian or they're just deceived and it's second best. So imagine a group of people, a large voting bloc that thinks they have the corner on truth and everybody else is wrong. And now you're not going to go into your workplace, probably, or, it's not something that I see people talking openly about, that they think they're the end all be all. But I think it kind of shows up in you can kind of get that feeling from somebody who thinks they have all the truth, that they're a little arrogant. They're not really open to another person's experience because they have all the answers. And so it makes interacting with other people transactional, not relational. Also, you're told that everybody's going to hell. So you need to make sure they get saved. So every interaction becomes something that you have to accomplish. Going back to
There's one right there on the table and she wants one. Take care of you.
Thank you. If you feel like you're in charge of other people's business, everybody becomes a project. Every interaction is, oh, I'm going to show them the truth, or I'm going to fix them, or I'm going to move them towards the way that I think, because I have the corner on truth. And God thinks I'm the best. And so that was a hard truth to realize as I was picking apart my faith, was that I didn't have a lot of the I and thou. You're an important person to me, and I just want to know you. I had some relationships like that, but most interactions were tainted by that belief that I had to fix everybody. As I'm talking to you, a lot of swear words are going through my head. It's very abusive. Also, I had a special destiny, I was prophesied over, and I had a mission from God, which made me feel all the more special, and all the more like if I left or if I questioned this, I wouldn't have that special mission anymore.
Well, can I just add that we've had this discussion before. The simplest way to think about it, just take 2,000 years ago, speed it up to the present. Remember the Pharisees? We would swear that, oh, Pharisees are horrible. But we were the embodiment of modern Pharisees. It's that simple. If you just watch Chosen, how they're also watching each other very carefully. And the biggest thing is if someone in your group started teetering, you were put in check. You were told you got to think this way. We knew how to think politically. Everything all down the line, the early church. In the years we evolved slowly, but not fast enough. Put it that way. But just think Pharisees, real simple. We were Pharisaical, meaning we watch everybody and everything was suspect. And Pharisees wanted to rule the government. They weren't allowed. That's changing now. That's it. Here we are. Simple.
Yeah. So it impacted a lot of areas of my life, and we were told that if we sought relationships, happiness, God's presence, truth, none of that could be found outside of this brand of Christianity. So supposedly the relationships I had with the people in the church were the best loving relationships in the whole world. And in truth, it was not authentic. It was transactional. It was very controlling. We were told that we had joy like no other people on the earth, and everybody else's supposed joy was counterfeit. And the same with truth. We had truth and nobody else had it, and everybody else's truth was not really true. And God's presence, only God could make us feel that transcendent feeling, maybe when you're breathing deep, you're in nature. If you're a Christian, if you're a charismatic Christian, and you feel that in nature, it's because it's God. God's with you and he's with you everywhere. But other people, that's counterfeit. And so one of the key things for me, because I do like those mystical experiences, was when I started going to yoga and I felt the same thing. And I was in yoga. Yoga's of the devil. God's there. I was feeling this wonderful sense of peace and transcendence, loving being in my body, which I was not allowed to enjoy, and thinking, yeah, this is not what they told me. It's not the reason why I started to really question, but it was confirmation. So one of the things that started my deconstruction of my faith is the pastor at the time was into prepping for the end of the world. And he was doing it kind of on the side. So he wasn't blatantly saying from the pulpit, you must buy guns. And stockpile it. Maybe he did that once or twice, but mostly he was just talking to people individually. But his sermons sounded just like Rush Limbaugh. I remember listening to his sermons and then I wasn't listening to Rush Limbaugh at the time, but I remember hearing something from one of those talk show guys and thinking, that's exactly what my pastor said. Wow. But anyway, he wanted us to prep for the end of the world. He was having classes on how to use a gun, sponsored at church, encouraging us to stockpile ammunition and food. He was all in. And I remember thinking, I was a librarian in my community, thinking, I love these people that I'm around. And there is no way that I'm going to enter into a practice that makes me think of them as the enemy. And it was, I had been questioning a little bit, but this was a big question and a big no for me. I continued at the church for 10 more years or so, but that was a big one. And I thought, if he's wrong about that, what else is he wrong about? And even though I wasn't allowed to question, I did. And it became more and more difficult to sit in church and hear talk show radio being spoken to me in the form of Christianity. And the Bible kind of interweaved with that. And I remember, so it was very spiritual to take notes. And so I'd have my little notebook and I'd say, this is.
Nobody was looking over you.
Oh, nobody. Yeah, I wrote really sloppy. And that's how I got through it. And then shortly after that, he retired and friends of ours became the pastors, a husband and wife. And we were able to work with them and influence them, and we all grew together. And the church really changed a lot in that time.
Open but when?
Um, becoming a lot less rigid. COVID was very divisive for that church because they were beginning to embrace things outside of the conservative, charismatic, whatever the thing that they told us to believe. So when the pastor said, please wear a mask, or said it's okay to get vaccinated, lots of people left. When Roe v. Wade wasn't celebrated, more people left. Now, he never said we're pro-choice, but he just didn't make a big deal about Roe v. Wade, but people left. When we didn't have services in the beginning of COVID, all of that was, those were big changes, and that was forced change. When Trump got the nomination, that's when I started deconstructing hard, because here was a group of people that I loved and knew, and in truth, they were very kind despite all of the abuse and misunderstanding on how to be a human, really, and interact with people. There were still loving, kind people in this, doing the best they could. And when Trump got the nomination, I thought, wait, where's the love? Wait, that's not love. He's not promoting love. What? Also, he's lying. It's obvious he's lying. Why are we still following him? These are people that said we love the best, we know the truth the best, and they were doing the exact opposite. And it was incomprehensible to me. And it forced me to really examine everything I believed. And so I started gathering with other people who were doing the same thing as I was. And we formed a nonprofit, and I have been meeting with people who've been raised in high control religious churches, environments, and the damage is extensive. It's abuse that's hidden in plain sight because religion is generally regarded very highly in the US. But so for the last 5 years, that has really helped me process a lot of the abuse, and it's also kind of burnt me out. So I'm pulling back a little bit from my involvement with that. But Trump was the great reckoning for a lot of people, and a lot of people started deconstructing their faith. When we were told that character mattered, remember Clinton? I mean, we were the loudest people about Bill Clinton, and all of a sudden it didn't. I could go on and on about this. There is just so much to talk about. But the preppers changed my mind. Trump changed my mind. But most of all, people changed my mind. And this happened way before Trump and way before prepping. People that I worked with who were in the LGBTQ community, people who were living on the margins, who were in poverty, who could not get the salary and the work they needed to live a life. You know, I didn't have words for it then, but I realized the things that I had been told about the welfare mom were absolutely incorrect. people in my community that use the library were doing the best they could, working really hard and couldn't get ahead. And I said, well, that's wrong. And these are people I love. These are people I'm called to serve and love and be with. And working in the library and being involved in the community, I had all these interactions that were genuine. We're starting to move away from that transactional stuff, but it was people, and it was very patient people, coworkers, who, when I would say something racist or homophobic, they would let me know that was not okay, but they would do it in such a kind way, because I think hopefully the political atmosphere at that time was not so charged, and I don't think people were as frustrated with the other side. But I would encourage everyone to know that you have the power to change people just by being who you are in this world, and your effect is probably much greater than you realize, just by embodying who you are. It was people that really changed me, and my children especially, because as they grew up, they found their own paths to faith, and I didn't feel like they had to do it just like me. So they were great teachers as well. And all of that, I still didn't leave. When we moved to Watkins Glen to take care of my mother, our church was just too far. And it had changed so much, and we had really been instrumental in changing things. So I probably would have taken a long time to leave, but I was exhausted. And when we finally got here, I felt like I was kind of broken. And I would sit in my seat and just draw energy from you. And you probably didn't even know. But when I felt like I'm a faith refugee, I've got really nothing, you all lent me your, and still do. I don't know what it is, your vibe, your energy, whatever, but I would just sit sometimes and say, I feel so lost and so broken. And you accepted me. So I have many more things to say, but I'll end it here and open it up for questions.
Amen, sister.
Thank you.
Can you speak?
Yes,
up to the-
I don't know if the two of you would be willing to do this. It's extremely personal, but I am curious about how you two managed to do this and stay together. So, maybe you'd be willing to do another session with both of you. Because you seem to be a loving couple, and coming out of that and still being together, I'm amazed.
Yeah, it's hard, and I changed my mind a lot quicker than he did.
But
So
he's here.
he's a great guy.
I can speak to that, I think. So while this was all going on, I just thought my wife was kind of weird, And then I do think that Donald Trump, I'm sorry, I think, yeah, sorry. Donald Trump, if she hasn't said it, he's the great revealer. Because this is what we do believe, and this is what he's saying, and she hasn't got into it, but the people are following him as like, he's a bad boy, but he's our bad boy. That's the belief. They even have a king, Cyrus, whatever. Cyrus. He kicked butt. He did it for us, so he's really God's instrument. He's a bad boy, but he's our bad boy, like Samson. What the heck? Okay. So the big reveal was this guy is nuts. He's harnessing a group of people who fly in formation like the Blue Angels. Whatever they do, they stay together and they follow. Hitler had the same deal. Okay. So she started breaking from that, and then I saw the cracks in the prepper and all that. But it was hard because for me, I don't know about Hope, but this is when you're Steve something for 40 years, that's not other, that's who you are. Understand? That's who you be, that's it. So you're the other, sorry. And slowly, you know, like a fossil, you're taking in and dropping parts out. Okay, whatever. So how it worked is real simple. What our grandparents didn't have, but thank God we have access to therapy. And God arranged that we had 2 realtors and 2 lawyers who were ripping our hearts apart in the house as we tried to sell our house in Cohocton with Canandaigua. They were making our life hell. And that got my attention. It was just tearing me apart and your stuff. So we were driven to therapy. And now we're on the brink of not divorce, but yeah, you know, it was rough. And you went and got therapy, and then you start finding these things called emotions, and it's not even, you know, somebody go, God, maybe like, wow, that's really weird, you know. And then the real turning point to me, for anyone who's listening on that part, is at different points he said to me, one real crucial point goes, you love your wife, don't you? It's just like Jesus saying to Peter, you love me, right? I'm like, okay. I married her 30 years. Of course I love her. And then later he said, you do love your wife, don't you? And I'm like, well, yeah. And like the third time, like Jesus, finally like, oh my God, this guy is maybe not a Christian. I don't know. But he's using scripture to say, do you love your wife? And I had the answer, of course, is, yes, I do. And it's like, well, if you do, why are you being such a jerk about it? It's all about, you know, wow, religion is what you believe, it comes out, right? So therapy helped to break up a lot of crap and garbage and wrong thinking. And I realized you have to make choices. God's all about choices. That's why it's hard to be a human. I'm God, you're not. Let's get together and we're a team. This is when you die, you're still not right. Or you are right, whatever. So therapy was a big one. Therapy. And you can't push this stuff on the rug. And my wife her hobby is all of trauma. We have books on it. Trauma, all reading about our own nation. If you haven't noticed, we're in trauma and we're getting more traumatized by the minute. And speaking of cults, I can say another dig for it again. Is that I'm not studying it, but I think my understanding is if you're in a cult, you can't come with facts. Facts are just noise. We got the facts, you know, we got it. But we talk about what realities and experiences you can't deny. Your past, and you talk about people's past, and we know it's to be true. That's kind of what got Hope going. And this stuff's crazy. What you're saying doesn't make sense, but I know this about people. I know this about myself. So we have to kind of probably figure out how that works, because we got millions of people who are no longer, I'm sorry, they're just not our following reality. Perhaps reality doesn't apply to them anymore. So,
Yeah.
sorry, I got too political there. Was there a question there?
Marlene?
I'm curious to know what brought you here to First Baptist.
Yes. We had explored other churches. Nothing felt really like home.
Yeah.
But we were attending a choir rehearsal in that room over there. And I looked at the banners and stuff and I realized that you were inclusive. And it just seemed like a nice place to check out. So, you know, we checked it out. Met a lot of great people, and Rebecca said, hey, come to the retreat. So I said, sure, why not? And
That was a week before, right?
yeah.
Really?
Wow.
Last year's retreat.
Yeah. So,
I've only been in there years.
yeah.
I have another question. When you would be in this halt, in the services, if they knew that you had done something you shouldn't have done, did you get called out, singled out?
So, yes, but not by name, but the pastor would preach about it. It's so annoying.
They preach about going to yoga.
Yeah, yeah, sure. If, so a friend of ours got married, she was in her forties, it was her first marriage. It was a great celebration, I was in the wedding party. And there was dancing, so on Sunday, the pastor talked about how you shouldn't dance.
Oh,
He didn't mention the wedding, but you knew.
did they
So
have drums?
we did.
Oh my God.
We had a good band.
There's, it was over the top. You not only had a band, but it wasn't all hymns and you actually danced. Drums. Oh my God. Oh, no question.
Louise? I don't know if she still has it, but.
Louise?
I saw that Bronwyn has a question.
Okay.
So I imagine they were children who grew up in church.
Yeah.
Then to themselves identified as gay or lesbian, trans or whatever.
Yes.
And if they acknowledge that with their parents, but how was that handled in the church? I'm sure it wasn't accepted, but for the parents. How did folks deal with that confusion of, this is the child I know and love, who's a good person, and my church is saying,
Yeah.
whatever.
That's a great question. So important. My pastor I had a friend, very good friend, who was gay, from back home. And my pastor told me I couldn't talk to him. I couldn't eat with him. When I go home to visit, I'm not supposed to see him. So I would imagine that the pastor told other people to cut off their children, but they didn't. So our church, while it was high control, there, in something that was that important, people did not fall in line. So one of my friends, her daughter is a lesbian, and she would have her daughter and her daughter's partner over for meals and stuff like that. I never talked to her too much about it, but I know Annie couldn't wrap her mind around the theology she had been taught, and here is her child. I hope she's had some kind of reconciliation since, but she was deep into the Christian nationalism. So she left the church before I became affirming. I don't know.
Well, I was just gonna say that I think that what I'm hearing from you is that there's this kind of fundamentalist sort of view of the Bible running through the church. And so this is kind of commentary. When you get into churches like that, you appropriate the Bible in a certain way and it becomes a weapon, just like an AR-15. It's a weapon to keep people in place. And especially with the LGBTQ community. I mean, they cherry pick those passages out of the Bible and say this is a sin and that they're going to hell.
Yeah, and Andrew and I have come across this too, not just with those clobber passages that clobber the queer community, but with a lot of things. We have been taught to see the world this way. This is what the Bible says about this. I love that this church doesn't have a set creed that we all believe the same thing. But it's a little mind-blowing sometimes because we're not used to it. And we'll bump up against things and we're like, it bothers Andrew more than it bothers me. I am at the place where I don't care. I will rebuild my beliefs. I know that love matters, kindness matters.
Mhm.
And that's where I'm coming from. I don't have to have it all figured out yet, but
Okay, I know. The church you belong to, was it an independent, autonomous
Yes.
unit? Or is there a larger organization like many, like the Baptist Church, you know, we have affiliations with other Baptists, da, 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 da. And so how did you then, it wasn't an autonomous
it was,
unit?
yeah.
It started by like one person or?
Basically,
group of- a
yes,
small group of people?
it's a non-denominational church,
I-
so when and we were out in the woods, just, yeah, there's really
Oh,
no accountability.
There were offshoot of Elam, there's Elam Bible College in Lima, it's been there for 200 something years. Finney preached there, so it's not just no backwoods thing. And we're an offshoot of that years ago, some guy named came out and started it. We had other church things that were affiliated, but much, independent.
And then,
Otherwise.
so when you hired a pastor, like, how did that work? Finding a pastor did the congregation make that selection or no?
No.
It was,
The board, yeah, the board.
and was
Good
the
call.
board, and was there ever any women in those positions?
Yeah,
Where-
but that was after, our friends became pastors. Yeah.
I feel like people are getting kind of restless, but I wondered, this is an interesting conversation. And I wondered if, we could continue this at another adult ed session. Yeah, and maybe.
Just like to say that I really appreciate that you didn't just demonize the whole experience or
Yeah.
just give it a totally negative. That sense of belonging is one of the most deepest needs I think we have as human beings. And when we see how important, how it brings people into a congregation like that, I think it's sobering to the rest of us should wake up and say, what really gives that? Where do we find that?
Yeah.
And that's good to name
Oh,
that.
Maybe for the next time, no, really, because we want, my question is, it's a Christian church. And I don't hear you talking about Jesus Christ in that situation. And I don't, maybe for the next time did they talk about Jesus Christ?
Yes,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah, but
all the time.
but not the way we do. obviously.
I don't know.
Well, that's my question.
Yeah.
So maybe you could address
Steve,
that.
Steve, I think we all have our different interpretations of who Jesus is.
Yeah.
Denominationally and also, individual churches. And, obviously, my impression of your church that you came out of was that they definitely spoke of Jesus, but it was in a Jesus was more of not necessarily the loving spiritual person that we know as much as Jesus was a part of the rule-making body that you were a part of.
Yes, and
Okay.
also they did speak as Jesus was very loving. It's confusing because there's a lot of talk about Jesus is loving. We have this relationship, not religion. So the speech sounds good, but the underneath the unwritten rules are different. And you don't realize it until you're really in deep. That there's a real disconnect. So you could talk to somebody from that kind of church and they're not going to necessarily come across as rigid and Jesus is going to squash you the minute you get out of line. Because we'd have sermons about, oh, that's the Baptists or something. That's not us. So
Again, not to relay this, but Debbie's talking to the kids today.
yeah,
Did they say Jesus was in trouble because he ate with people Would they say that? They would.
Yeah,
It's really interesting, and maybe we can just think about like it's adult ed or sermons or whatever. One thing I'm hearing in this is a broader thing, is some opportunity for us to do a little thinking, talking about different ways of approaching the Bible. And how how there's a lot of kind of the realm of that, and different ways of people approaching Jesus, and that there can be these similarities and yet, right? So
Right.
that there's, to kind of, we talked about a little bit last week in those of us that were part of newcomers gathering with two people who are quite, who say, I don't really have a church background. And we got this whole idea of like, what does it mean to then say you're Christian, And what does that mean, right? There's a lot of definitions of what
Well,
that
as
means.
a seminary, I don't want to tout this, but as a seminary trained person, when you're talking about how you believe in Jesus, it's your Christology.
Exactly. So I used that term last week, and that
Yeah.
and that we even talk about having a high Christology or a
Okay,
low
low
Christology,
Christology,
like,
yeah.
and that's represented in the Gospels. That Mark's view of Jesus is much more Jesus a human who's the special appointed one. But by the time you get to John, Jesus is the Word, the Logos from the beginning, and that's a range of how you understand Jesus as the Christ. So I think it's just a good sort of thing to put out there that we might talk about a little more, because I feel like there's a place for us, more of us, to feel like you're knowledgeable about the range and about how and why we land on this congregation where we do, so that you then can engage in somebody else in a way that, not to put them down, but just to kind of say, okay, this is where this person's coming from. Yeah.
I just want to connect to that, what you said earlier about how it's humans interacting with humans that helped you, in a sense, wake up. And that if we can talk about our Christology and so on, if we could also talk about how all of us can be part of that more consciously. I think the conservative church has been very organized. And very intentional. And I think all of us in the more progressive faith extension, we need to get our shit together. And we need to be much more
Educated,
informed, organized, active, within within the integrity of our faith.
We had a former member who's passed away.
I'd like to say something.
Could I speak first? Okay. What I was going to say is, Hugh Tucker was the pastor, and he was a member of this church for many years. He's passed now. But he always said, we progressives have forgotten how to do evangelism. And we need to get our act together because we have something good to share. But we're so afraid of the word. Call it something else then. I'm like, exactly what you said, Kathy. Get our shit together. Right?
Because it's about human beings.
It is, and that's exactly what he was expressing, his experience in a church on the West Coast. They had been very intentional as progressives about sharing, like being in relationship with people to open people's hearts to like hearing the good news.
Having been the new member in that meeting last week, I heartily encourage all of you to do that because it was my question. I do not understand Christianity, but I'm willing to learn.
Did Louise have a question?
Yeah. I just have, yes, I definitely agree with the trend of the conversation. I also do want to express that, we have a whole Zoom audience, and the acoustics of this kind of conversation are terrible. I know Leslie Schultz said this sort of loudly and clearly, and now because I can't attend, I'm much more sensitized to it. But we have people basically all over the country who want to be part of our church and who are, but I really think we need to put a priority on facilitating the visual and audio abilities of people on Zoom to participate. The conversation I love this topic. I think it's vital to me because I have so many relatives who are, you know, pretty conservative and MAGA people. So this is like a vital tool that I'm hoping to gain. And it has been very frustrating to be part of this conversation because it's been terribly garbled. Anyway, that's just my appeal really to council that we do something about it sooner as opposed to later. And I want to thank Hope and Andrew for being willing to do this. It's really we need it. Thank you.
Grace, well, she's gone.
Okay.
I just wanted to say some research has been done on this. It's not crystal clear what the solution is. And I'm very open to people with more technological,
I don't even know, Debbie, but maybe like people who are speaking, would it be possible for them to hold a microphone like we do in the sanctuary?
Problem
talk
solvers
about
right
that
now.
right
Yeah,
now.
so if you got ideas, share them with Leslie or Debbie and we'll work on it. Right.
Yeah, thank you.
I would like to thank Hope.
Yes.
You are a gift to all of us. Really.
Amen.
Amen. Questions
Amen.
out there that challenge us, that give us so much more insight into today's world and our faith and how we live it out. Okay. We will, to be continued.